Whilst I was building this box up, I should have actually, it would have been better if we had a damaged gearbox so I could build it back up for you. But one of the problems associated with the R380 is when you change down from 5th, sometimes you have to go into, just go forward into 3rd and then back into 4th before you can actually select gear. It's a bit annoying. So if you're coming down from 5th and you're going into 4th, you'll find out that it just won't go in, not unless you notch it forward and then come back into 4th. It's quite common. And what it is the synchro ring here, where it's got this little notch in the brass work here, it's become elongated. And what that means is when this moves a little bit, those teeth cannot line up. It'll move backwards and forwards like this, and then the little synchro teeth can't get in line. They'll be going, instead of being nicely in line, they'll be overlapping something like this, so it won't allow that gear to go in. So that's one of the problems, and it only seems to happen on R380s. I don't think it happens on LT77s, but it does happen on these quite a lot. So it does mean stripping your box down to replace this. I have known people clever enough to take off the top cover, leave all this together, undo the top cover, move it out, pull out the primary pinion and change this, and then box it all back up together again. However, I do find that a little bit daunting because you're going to break the seal for the silicone seal on here. So I don't know. Will it work? I don't know. I've never done it. So next thing, we're going to talk a little bit about synchro mesh units. One thing I didn't mention when we were doing this synchro mesh on here is that it has got some marks on the synchronizer unit itself to show you which is 5th gear, and it's got 5 little notches on here. So we know that that can only go on one way around. So I didn't show you what was inside these synchronizers. So what we're going to do, we're going to find a flat screwdriver here. Tools everywhere now. And we're going to take it apart. Now if you run back through the other series of videos I did on an LT85 gearbox, these little slippers here were held in by a spring and a ball, and they were a little bit wider, but they were a bugger to put back together again because the springs and balls would pop out. And these, well, these are a little bit simpler. Let me show you. It's got a spring ring in, and for some reason the reverse and 5th are actually painted yellow, and you can see straight away one of the little slippers come out. Let's take this one out. Now, whenever you take these apart and you've got it all nicely cleaned up, one of the wisest things you could do is put some markings on it with your little Sharpie. Now again, this isn't perfect because, well, Sharpie can come off if you use any solvents in your parts washer, but try and mark up where the teeth are. And the reason for that is that when you take it apart, or if you're doing these gearboxes on other vehicles, you'll see, well, actually this is quite a good example, because on some vehicles like the LT85, this was machined all the way around inside. If you look in here, it's only got a notch every 3rd position for the synchro. So if you got this on wrong, the synchros wouldn't work, and it's very, very important. So I put a little mark on there, but you can see here where the slippers go, and by the slippers I mean these things here. Those sit in here. Those are the selectors. They move backwards and forwards with the synchro ring. They in turn sit in here in that little groove there, and when your synchro, how do we get this, when it moves, it moves in and out like this, but it'll always replace to its, when it's in neutral, it always will go into that little detent hole in here. I hope that's clear. It's very difficult to explain, but if you can see the shape of the teeth, you can see the teeth here. They're not exactly, there's a little undercut inside. And so it makes it, when you look at these things, you think, oh, they're worn out, they should be parallel, but actually that's how they're supposed to be. Can you see inside there? That's how they're supposed to be. So this isn't actually worn that much. And again, when you compare it to a new one, you'll buy a new one and you'll see it's exactly the same. So how do we put this back together? Well, obviously, we put our little mark on there. You could actually cheat and put a little tiny Dremel grinder mark on there, because Sharpie is something that comes off. So we're going to line up in this instance, because we know the relative position of our little Sharpie mark there, where the detent hole is here, has to line up with this slot like this. Now I should really clean this out, but there, perhaps you can see that quite clearly here, where the detent hole is lined up with the slipper, and you can see it's nice and free. It's really easy to work with. So we're going to put it down, and we're going to put the face down this side, because otherwise the ring will fall down. So we're going to put that down onto a flat surface. We're going to put the slippers in the holes like this. And then we're going to take these spring rings, and and you can see there's a little notch in the top. Well, that fits under one of, preferably the middle one, where you're putting the first spring on. And that's simple as that. It just snaps in like that. Now the other side. So that's the end of one, which is also going to be the middle piece of the back side. And then, so you can see there, I'm going to turn it 180 degrees, and you can see that there's like a constant spring front and back. So that's really how a synchro works. I didn't take it apart on this box because it wasn't really necessary, but these are different. LT77s, R380s, these are very much the same, but there are LT85 and LT95. They're a different thing altogether. So I hope that clears that little corner up. Before I put the extension housing on, I just want to do a little bit more about this. Some things you should sort of check for. One of the things here is this reverse selector. Now I'm not going to take it out because it's not broken. If it flicks up and down, it's on the spring, and if it moves nice and freely, you don't really have to take everything apart. So, but if you've noticed here, I've taken this housing off here. 1 minute, that's the way it goes on. And a lot of people have asked me, what the heck does this thing do? Well, all it is a tube to pass oil. You know, we mentioned this before, oil's sucked up through this tube via the filter, comes up into the pump, and then it's pumped out through this hole here. When it comes from this hole here, it comes up to here, and then into the main shaft. But on some vehicles, especially the North American V8s, this was substituted, and housing was put on here that went to an oil cooler at the front of the car to cool the transmission oil down. And funnily enough, it was not really fitted to an awful lot of vehicles. So if you want to do an upgrade for an oil cooler, well, there's the piece, but you've got to try and find a V8 with this on, and there wasn't all that many about. So that's what that does. I think I mentioned before, the bearings, if they're alright, try the shafting, try the little roller in there, just inspect everything. As I mentioned, because I'm doing this video the day after I did the other one, so I can't really remember what I was saying. But I'm not taking this piece out because these break, but again, if you do take it out, go to Ashcroft's and get the better one, not the sort of original one. They do an upgraded one which is an awful lot better. So what we're going to do now is assemble this casing, because on the floor down here I've assembled the gearbox as it should be, and I'm going to clean off the faces. I'm going to take out our temporary bolts without disturbing the joint face underneath. And like I say, everything's done for a reason in a set order. And this is why you don't want to do it on the bench, because if you do it on the bench and it's horizontal, there's a good chance that this plate may come apart, you know, fall over, and then you've lost your joint seal, and then you've got to take it all to bits again. So ideally, when I build the gearbox up, it's like put it all back together all at the same time. Well, this silicone's still a little bit soft and hasn't had time to dry. So what we're going to do now is put the cover on. So I've got a nice coating of high-low sil on there, and I've put the pipe here towards the bottom. I put a little bit of high-low sil on the tube just to stop it dropping out, because they often drop out, and I've put the filter into the housing, into the gearbox, and that points towards the bottom. Now this is tricky to put on, but not impossible, and perhaps you'll understand now why I took the oil pump out. So we put the oil filter pipe into the filter, and then very carefully we try and get all the all the rollers in line, like that. Just be careful you don't knock a bearing out. It's quite easy to do to get them trapped. So that's in place, and like I say, you'll understand now why I took the oil pump off, because it's even more difficult to get that little flat lined up whilst you're assembling that, because it is a bit tricky. Next thing, put the bolts in. I won't show you how to do that because that's kind of boring. The oil pump for a 300 TDI is just a little, like a gear, not a gear pump, but it's a concentric pump, and it's driven by a flat, 2 flats off the lay shaft. You cannot buy, I don't think you can buy individual parts for this. You have to buy the whole complete unit. So if you want to strip it down to clean it, you have to go to see Ashcroft's, because they sell these special gaskets which we've never found from Land Rover. You can't buy these from Land Rover, but you can get them from Ashcroft's. And this is it's got a sealer on the top edge, and it's a plastic, and if you take it apart you can never really get it to seal properly, and because it's on the back of the gearbox you don't want it leaking out oil all over the floor. So if you want to take this apart, get the gasket first. I'm not taking this one apart because the oil pressure was good. I just want to show you what it looks like, and also at the same time, if you're at Ashcroft's, get the O-ring. Again, I don't think it's available apart from being in a full kit. So our next job is to fit the oil pump. Prior to fitting the pump, it's wise to prime it a little bit. You can actually use, if you've got the pump stripped down and you've got the gasket, usually prime them with a little bit of Vaseline, but I've put some ATF in this pump, and I'm just making sure it's it's okay, and you can hear it when I put my finger over the hole. You can hear it pumping. So a little smear of ATF all the way around, and now we're going to fit it. So the pump only goes in one way, and I don't know if you can see, if you can focus it. It's got top marked on here. This goes at the top of the gearbox. Otherwise, the holes here won't line up. Very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the shaft on the lay shaft. I'm going to turn it so that that shaft is in line, so it gives me a fighting chance. And I'm also going to turn this gear drive so this is at the top, and it's kind of confusing because there's the top, and there is a bolt hole. So we turn it round, we want this to be slightly off centre to that bolt hole, and then we're going to pop it in. The oil pump is quite tricky to install. It's got top marked on here. You can see just here. Well, there we are. So it's got top marked on the top of the pump. I always like to change the O-rings just in case. Now the thing is, if you install this and you cut the O-ring, you've got to take off the housing again to knock the pump up from the inside. You can't get it out. Now you're wondering why I've put some split pins through here. Well, these are just to help me guide it into place, whilst, you know, so just to put the bolt holes in, like, well, not the bolt holes, but get it lined up like that, so we have a fighting chance when we put the pump in that the holes are going to line up for the bolts, because it is quite tight. So just carefully, just tap it down a little way, and you can see there, I wiggled the main shaft just a little bit so it would go in. With the oil pump now in, and they are tricky to get in, now's the time to fit the collar on this shaft. Again, quick inspection, make sure there's no great big grooves and scores in it, or any gashes. If there is, now's the time to replace it. So what I'm going to show you now is using the tool again to force this collar onto here. Now what we've got to do first of all is got to put some grease on the shaft and into the oil seal. Got plenty in there because we've got to make sure it goes nice and easy. And next we'll get the tool assembled to put this collar on. I've got the tool assembled, and we just tighten this down progressively. I've put an extension bar on because I found the handle was a little bit too small. But just gently pull it down. I'm going to pause this here, but you can see what I'm doing. When we tighten down the collar, we tighten it down as far as it will go. You'll soon see. If everything works out okay, the groove in the collar will be flush with the oil seal. And there, that's it there. So now we can back off our tool, get everything out the way, and now we can put the gearbox back onto the bench. With the gearbox back on the bench, we're now going to fit this locator for the 5th gear. Again, put some high-low seal around it, make sure it's grease free, and then with a little screwdriver just pull that little collar forward a little bit if it's back, and then that should just tap into place. just like that, and fit the bolt. Make sure it's got a little locking washer on there. So I'm just going to use the air ratchet and tighten it down. Now you're probably wondering, on this gearbox, well, I'll just take this adapter out, I didn't fit the yoke on for the Selector yet. Now that's because on this gearbox, well, we can put it in later by moving the gears forward. So what we do is we just, let me turn this, if I can, I've got tools everywhere. So, let me see if I can put this under here so you can see what I'm talking about. The Selector shaft, to get this yoke on, is a little bit difficult because it won't go through. So if you just push the gears forward a bit, like that, and then you'll find that that will now fit. It might be a bit tight, but with a bit of wiggling about, you should be able to get that on. I'm going to wiggle it around a bit because there might be a bit of a burr. Yeah, there's a tiny burr on the back, so I'm just going to file that off with a bit of emery cloth and fit this piece. You can move the Selector shaft back quite easily with a pair of pliers, and just, you know, if you have a struggle. It's sometimes easier to put this piece on when you're putting the cover on. I don't know, it's up to you. It doesn't sound very professional, but there's different ways of doing it. The next thing is to put the grub screw back in. Now, Land Rover recommend putting a new grub screw in, but again, if you haven't got one, bit of thread locker on there, and then locate the shaft and see if we can get that started and pulled down. Sometimes it might be easier just to use one of these Allen keys with a little ball on, just to get started, so we can turn the shaft around a little bit. That's going in lovely. Wipe off that excess, and then if we find our ratchet and extension, we can tighten that grub screw down, not that one. Where's it gone? Hold on. I put it under the Allen keys. So, with that nice and snug, we can pull that down nice and tight, and that's not coming off. Now, you'll have seen here I've put the oil transfer pipe back on, but what I'm going to do for you now, I'm going to take it off again. Let me get this right. I want to get this right where and we're going to put some oil in, and we're going to pump it around the gearbox. But first of all, using a new copper washer, we're going to put the drain bung back in. So out of a clean bucket with a clean lid, we're going to fill it with ATF. Believe me, this is the easiest way of doing it. Alright, I don't know how much I've got in there, but I should have enough to get the pump going. Let me put the top back on the barrel. So now I've got some oil in this gearbox. We're going to just turn the shaft. We'll have to turn it a few times, and you can see now the oil pump is pumping oil out of there, and we can tell we've got quite a good little bit of pressure on there when we put our finger over the end. So that's good. Next, a couple of new O-rings in here, then you can put the cover on. We've just got to make sure we know which way it goes round. I just like to check, make sure the oil's getting into these things. before we get much further. And the oil's going around that nice and lovely. So basically, all we've got to do now is put the reverse switch in, and we're going to put on the cover just temporarily to run through the gears. Now the reason why I'm going to just do it temporarily is I'm going to strip this down, not the cover but what's called the remote. I'm going to strip it down and compare it to an LT77 to show you what to look for. But the similarities are quite common. So I'm going to clean off this gasket material here and then try it on and try it with the shifter. I didn't spend too long on this gearbox cleaning up the outsides because it's just going to go back on my truck and nobody's going to see it, but you could actually spend a lot of time cleaning this up. I haven't forgotten to put the reverse switch in, but what I wanted to show you was if we can go up to the lever. Again, when we come back to do how to set these tops up, I'll show you, but what we're going to do now is just run through the gears. So there's first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth, and fifth is kind of funny because obviously you push it forward and up. Now when you're driving your R380, whenever you change back down from fifth to fourth, as I mentioned, sometimes it won't go in because of the synchro rings are a bit funny, but you always hear this click. Listen. Did you hear it? And somebody say, "Whoa, there's something wrong." And it's actually that spring piece inside bouncing back and forward so it doesn't lock into reverse. Reverse is over here. Whoa. Reverse is there. That's working fine. Job done. Now, questions? You at the back. Can you do it yourself? Of course you can. The thing is, the reason why you're taking the gearbox apart in the first place is that it's broken. So why not have a go? Because you can't make it any worse. It is complicated, but if you follow the video and sort of get the book out and follow the book as well, the Land Rover book, it will tell you how to do this, but the Land Rover book is so vague, and that's why I'm doing this series of videos on transmissions. In fact, I might just go through the whole bloody workshop manual and go through things for you guys to show you really how I do it as a I don't know, a day-to-day mechanic. That's what I do every day, so I mean it is quite straightforward. But like I say, if you want to have a go, have a go. And you know what the thing is? The worst thing can happen is put it all in a big box and send it to Ashcroft's. They should know how to put it back together again. So if you like this video, click the subscribe. And also, while you're subscribing, click that little bell, because I'll tell you something, I've noticed that there's people coming on to me in private emails and asking me, "Hey, where's the next series of this video, Mike?" And I'll have to point them in the direction. So even though you subscribe, doesn't mean you're always going to get notification that I've put something new up. And again, pass this on to your mates in the clubs and things like this, because they'll, you know, just something visual is really helpful if you've got the book to read. So I hope you enjoyed all that, and I think the next one we'll do, if I can get it out of the container, I've got an LT95, the 4-speed that was fitted to the V8 Range Rovers and some Defenders, but it was also fitted to the, now let me see if I can pronounce this right, the Parenti in Australia. So there's some Australian guys who are probably interested in that. So let's see what we can do, but for now I'm going to put the reverse switch in, and that's done.